At the head of the long dining table sat Victor Langston, mid-50s, silver threading through his dark hair, posture rigid with the weight of success. His tailored suit spoke of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, but his eyes, they were distant, always scanning, always measuring, never quite landing. To his right sat Clara, his wife of 28 years. Her hands rested gently in her lap, her gaze lowered to her untouched plate of roasted duck. She hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. Not since Victor had dismissed Livia's news about her scholarship with a curt, "That's nice, but Sophia's piano recital is next week. You'll be there, won't you?" And there, at the far end of the table, sat Livia, 17, sharp-eyed, quiet, with her mother's olive skin and her father's stubborn jaw, but none of his attention. She wore a simple navy sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a loose braid. In her lap, hidden beneath the tablecloth, her fingers trembled around the edge of an acceptance letter from Oxford. She'd waited all week to tell him. Practiced the words in the mirror, "Dad, I got the full scholarship. I leave in August." She'd imagined him smiling, maybe even hugging her. But when she'd finally spoken, voice barely above a whisper, he'd only nodded, already turning to his phone. "Good. You'll manage your own expenses then." Now, as the silence thickened like fog, Livia watched her father lift his wine glass and take a slow sip, his eyes flicking toward the grand staircase, where any moment Sophia would descend. Sophia, his other daughter, not by blood, not by law, but by choice. The girl he'd brought home 6 months ago after reconnecting with an old flame, a woman who'd passed away suddenly, leaving behind a teenage daughter Victor claimed he owed a second chance. And oh, how he'd given it to her. Private tutors, designer clothes, a horse named Serafina, a room twice the size of Livia's. Footsteps echoed on the marble. Sophia appeared in a blush-pink dress, her golden hair catching the chandelier light like spun silk. She beamed. "Sorry I'm late. I was practicing my Chopin nocturne. It's for the gala next month." Victor's face softened instantly. "You're never late, my dear. Come, sit by me." He pulled out the chair beside him, the one Livia had occupied since childhood, now permanently vacant. Livia didn't move. She just stared at her plate, her throat tight. "You didn't eat?" Clara murmured, so softly only Livia could hear. "I'm not hungry," Livia whispered back, her voice cracking like thin ice. Across the table, Sophia laughed at something Victor said. Something about investing in her future music school. Victor reached over and squeezed her hand. "You've got real talent, Sophia. Real potential." The words hung in the air like smoke. Potential. As if Livia had none. As if her straight A's, her volunteer work at the shelter, her paintings that had won national contests. None of it mattered. Because she wasn't her. Livia pushed her chair back slowly, the scrape echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Leaving so soon?" Victor asked, not looking up. "I have an essay to finish," she said, her voice steady now, too steady. He waved a hand. "Don't stay up too late. You'll need your energy to drive Sophia to her fitting tomorrow." Livia froze. "I have my own interview with the Rhodes Committee via Zoom at 7 a.m. "Oh." He frowned slightly, as if inconvenienced. "Then ask the driver to take her." She wanted to scream, to throw her glass, to ask, "Am I invisible to you? Am I not your daughter too?" But she didn't, because she already knew the answer. Instead, she walked out, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, each one heavier than the last. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. She stood on the terrace, the cold air biting her cheeks, and finally let the tears fall, silent, hot, endless. In her pocket, the Oxford letter felt like a lifeline. And for the first time, she didn't just want to leave. She needed to, because staying meant disappearing completely, erased by the shadow of a girl her father chose over her. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt, a quiet fire began to burn. A silver vase she didn't need to polish, just to keep her hands busy. She'd felt it for weeks, the shift in the air, the way Victor checked his phone more often, the hushed calls behind closed doors. She didn't ask. She never did. Some silences were safer than truths. Then the door opened. Victor stood there, coat still on, eyes bright with something Clara hadn't seen in years' tenderness. Behind him, half hidden by the marble column, stood a girl, 17, pale skin dusted with freckles, wide hazel eyes full of nervous hope, clutching a small suitcase like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Her hair, golden brown, sun-kissed at the ends, was tied in a loose ponytail. She wore jeans and a white blouse, simple but clean, and her shoes were scuffed at the toes. "Clara," Victor said, voice softer than usual. "This is Sophia." Clara's hands stilled. The vase slipped slightly, catching the light. She didn't move toward them, didn't smile, just stared. Sophia stepped forward, voice trembling but polite. "Mrs. Langston, it's an honor to meet you." Clara blinked. "How do you know my name?" I've heard stories," Sophia whispered. "My mother, she spoke of you sometimes." A beat of silence, heavy, suffocating. Victor cleared his throat. "Elena passed away 3 weeks ago. Cancer. She asked me before she died to look after Sophia, to give her a home." Clara finally looked at him, really looked, and in that moment, she saw it. The guilt masked as generosity, the longing disguised as duty. Elena, his first love, the one he'd left behind when ambition called louder than heart. "And you agreed?" Clara asked, voice flat. "I had to," he said, as if it were obvious, as if it required no discussion, no consultation with the wife who'd shared his bed for nearly 3 decades. From the hallway, Livia appeared, drawn by the voices. She stopped short when she saw the girl, saw her father's hand resting gently on Sophia's shoulder, the way he never touched Livia unless it was to steer her away from a photographer or adjust her posture at a gala. "Who's this?" Livia asked, voice cautious. "This is Sophia," Victor said, turning to her with a warmth that made Livia's stomach twist. "She'll be staying with us. From now on, she's family." Family. The word hung in the air like smoke. Livia studied Sophia, really studied her. There was something familiar in the curve of her jaw, the tilt of her brow. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to make Livia's breath catch. "Your dad's daughter?" she asked quietly. Sophia's eyes widened. "Oh, no, I mean not biologically. My mom and your dad. They were close when they were young. Very close." Victor shifted uncomfortably. "That's enough, Sophia." But Livia understood. The pieces clicked into place with a quiet, devastating clarity. This girl wasn't just some distant relative. She was the ghost of a life her father might have chosen, the life he clearly wished he'd lived. Later that evening, over tea in the sunroom, Sophia tried to bridge the gap. "I don't want to take anything from you," she said to Livia, hands wrapped around her cup. "I swear, I didn't even know about you until last month." Livia stared out the window at the garden her mother had planted. Roses, lavender, jasmine. All things that bloomed beautifully but died quickly if neglected. "You're not taking anything," Livia said, voice hollow. "He's giving it to you." Sophia bit her lip. "He says you're brilliant, that you got into every Ivy League school you applied to. He told you that." Livia almost laughed. "Funny, he never tells me I'm brilliant." Sophia looked down. "I think he doesn't know how to say it to your face. Or maybe he just doesn't feel it," Livia replied, standing up. "Welcome to the house, Sophia. Try not to break anything important." She walked out, but not before seeing the hurt flash in Sophia's eyes, and the flicker of shame in her father's, watching from the doorway. That night, Victor stood outside Livia's room, hand raised to knock. But he didn't. He just stood there, listening to the muffled sound of her crying into her pillow, soft, controlled sobs that broke his heart more than any scream ever could. And yet, he turned away, because facing her pain meant facing his own choices. And Victor Langston had spent a lifetime running from those. Meanwhile, in the guest room down the hall, Sophia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. On her nightstand sat a framed photo of her mother, smiling, young, standing beside a much younger Victor at a beach bonfire. They looked happy, whole. She traced the glass with her fingertip and whispered, "Why did you send me here?" "Mom, do you know what this is doing to them outside?" The wind picked up, rustling the trees like secrets being passed between shadows. And in that moment, 3 lives, bound by blood, choice, and regret, began to unravel, each thread pulled taut by the weight of a single decision he chose her. Not because she was better, but because she reminded him of who he used to be. Muffled, her presence ignored. She stopped speaking at dinner unless spoken to. She ate in her room most nights, textbooks spread across her lap, headphones sealing her in a world where she mattered. But Victor bloomed. He took Sophia to art galleries, bought her a vintage Steinway grand piano for the East Parlor, enrolled her in private voice lessons with a Juilliard professor. He laughed more real laughs, the kind that started in his chest and spilled out warm and easy. He called her my bright star in front of guests, ruffled her hair like she was still a child, even though she was nearly grown. And Livia watched, from the staircase, from the garden, from behind half-open doors. One afternoon, she stood in the hallway outside the music room, hidden in the shadow of an armoire, as Victor sat beside Sophia on the piano bench. Sophia played a Chopin nocturne, halting, imperfect, but earnest. When she finished, Victor clapped, eyes shining. "That was breathtaking," he said. "You have a gift, Sophia, a true gift." Sophia blushed. "I wish I were half as good as Livia. She's amazing at everything." Victor's smile faded slightly. He sighed, leaning back. "Livia, she's talented, yes, but talent without warmth is just noise. You feel the music. That's rare." Livia's breath caught. Noise. That's what he thought of her. All those years of perfect grades, of silent sacrifices, of trying to be enough. He saw it all as cold calculation. Empty performance. She turned away before the tears could fall. Later that week, the invitations arrived for the Langston Foundation Gala, a black tie event held annually at their estate. Livia had helped design the floral arrangements last year, working alongside the event planner for weeks. This time, no one asked her. Instead, Victor called Sophia into his study. "You'll open the evening with a short recital," he announced, handing her a printed program. 10 minutes, just enough to set the tone. Sophia's eyes lit up. "Really, me?" "Of course," he said, smiling. "You're the heart of this family now. The heart." Livia, passing by the open door with a stack of library books, froze. That night, she found Clara on the terrace, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, staring at the stars. "He didn't even ask if I wanted to attend," Livia said, voice raw. "He just assumed I'd fade into the background again." Clara turned, her eyes tired but fierce. "You don't have to stay in the shadows, Livia. I don't know how to step out," she whispered. "Every time I try, he looks right through me." Clara reached out, cupping her daughter's face. "Then stop trying to be seen by him. Be seen by yourself, by the world. Let your light burn so bright, he can't ignore it, even if he wants to." The words lodged deep in Livia's chest. 2 days before the gala, Victor hosted a small rehearsal dinner for the board members. Livia wore a simple emerald dress, her favorite, the one she'd worn when she won the national debate championship. She hoped, foolishly, that he might notice. But he didn't. He was too busy showing off Sophia's new necklace, a diamond pendant shaped like a treble clef. "Custom-made," he bragged to the CFO of Langston Holdings. "Because she deserves only the best." Livia excused herself early, claiming a headache. Upstairs, she opened her laptop and stared at the Oxford acceptance email. The deadline to confirm enrollment was in 3 days. She hadn't replied. Part of her still waited for an apology, a sign, a single moment where he looked at her and saw her. It never came. The night of the gala arrived, the estate glittering under thousands of string lights. Guests in tuxedos and gowns flowed through the gardens like a river of silk and secrets. Livia stood near the fountain, sipping sparkling water, watching as Sophia took the stage beneath a canopy of white roses. She played beautifully, truly, and the crowd erupted in applause. Victor stood front and center, beaming, tears in his eyes. Livia turned away and walked straight into Mr. Delaney, the chairman of the Rhodes Trust, who'd been a guest at every Langston gala since she was 10. "Livia," he said warmly, "I heard you got the full scholarship to Oxford. Congratulations. Your father must be bursting with pride." She forced a smile. "He hasn't mentioned it." Mr. Delaney frowned, glancing toward Victor, who was now placing a proud hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Well, perhaps he doesn't realize how extraordinary you are." "I'm starting to think he never will," she said quietly. But then something shifted in her eyes, not defeat, but resolve. The next morning, while the house still slept off the gala's champagne haze, Livia sat at her desk and typed a single sentence into the confirmation portal. "I accept." She hit send, and for the first time in years, she felt something like peace. But peace didn't last, because that afternoon Victor called her into his study. "I heard you confirmed Oxford," he said, not looking up from his ledger. "Yes," she replied, standing tall. "Good. Saves me the tuition bill." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Sophia's applying to Juilliard next year. I'll be covering all her expenses, of course." Livia's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Of course. You'll need to handle your own flights, accommodations, everything. I assume you've planned for that." "I have," she said, voice steady. He finally looked at her. "You're leaving in August, then?" "Yes." A silence stretched between them, wide, deep, final. And in that silence, Livia realized he wasn't sad. He wasn't even surprised. He was relieved, because with her gone, there would be no more comparisons. No more quiet reminders of the daughter he failed. Only Sophia, the perfect, grateful, chosen one. But as Livia walked out, she didn't look back. Because she knew something Victor didn't yet. Absence has a way of echoing louder than presence. Clara watched her from doorways, from garden benches, from the kitchen window. She didn't speak much, but her presence was a quiet anchor. A silent "I see you" in a house that had long refused to look. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Clara found Livia in the attic, sorting through old trunks. "You don't have to take everything," Clara said softly, stepping inside. "Some things are better left behind." Livia held up a small music box, silver, engraved with her initials. "He gave me this the day I got into National Honor Society. Said it was a token of pride. But he never wounded it, never asked if it worked." She opened it. A faint, broken melody wheezed out, off-key, incomplete. "It doesn't even play right." Clara sat beside her on the dusty floor. "You've spent your whole life waiting for him to fix it, to fix you in his eyes." Livia's voice cracked. "What if I'm not enough? What if I leave and he never misses me?" "Oh, sweetheart," Clara whispered, pulling her close. "He'll miss you the moment you're gone. But missing isn't loving. And you deserve more than absence dressed as regret." Downstairs, laughter floated up, the warm, easy kind. Sophia was playing piano again, and Victor was singing along, off-key but joyful. The sound wrapped around the house like a blanket, one that didn't cover Livia. Later that night, Livia stood outside her parents' bedroom, something she hadn't done since she was a child with nightmares. The door was slightly ajar. She heard Clara's voice, low and urgent. "She's leaving in 6 weeks, Victor. 6 weeks. And you haven't asked her a single question about Oxford." "Not one." Victor sighed. "She's capable, independent. She doesn't need coddling. She needs her father." Clara shot back, voice trembling. "Not a benefactor, not a critic. A father." A pause. Then, quieter, "I don't know how to be that for her, Clara. Every time I look at her, I see disappointment. My own disappointment." Clara's voice rose. "She's brilliant, kind. She volunteers at the shelter every weekend while you're off buying Sophia concert tickets. I'm trying to give Sophia what she never had." Victor snapped. "And what did Livia ever have?" Clara whispered. "Except silence." Silence answered her. Livia stepped back, heart pounding. So that was it. She wasn't just unloved. She was a mirror, a reminder of his failures, his compromises, the life he settled for instead of the one he dreamed of with Elena. She walked to her room, numb. But the numbness didn't last, because the next morning over breakfast Sophia, innocent, earnest, tried to bridge the chasm. "I heard you're going to Oxford," she said, eyes wide with admiration. "That's incredible, Livia. Can I visit you someday?" Livia stirred her tea slowly. "Sure, if you can afford the flight." Sophia blinked. "Oh, I'm sure Dad will pay." The words hung there, casual, devastating. Victor, reading the newspaper, didn't look up. "Of course I will, darling. You deserve to see the world." Livia set her spoon down with a sharp clink. "And what do I deserve? Dad, a one-way ticket and a wave from the driveway." He finally looked at her. "Don't be dramatic. You wanted independence. Now you have it." "I wanted you to see me," she said, voice breaking. "Just once." For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, regret. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He folded the paper. "You'll thank me one day for not babying you." Livia stood. "No. One day you'll wish you had." She walked out, but not before catching Sophia's stricken expression. The dawning horror that she'd become the weapon in a war she never asked to fight. That afternoon, Livia found an old journal of her mother's in the study, tucked behind legal files, forgotten. Inside, dated 20 years ago, a passage read, "Victor says Livia cries too easily. That she's too sensitive for this world. But sensitivity isn't weakness, it's depth. And one day, he'll realize the daughter he calls cold is the only one who truly feels." Tears blurred the ink. She closed the journal and placed it back exactly as she found it. But something inside her shifted. She wasn't leaving to escape him. She was leaving to become who she was always meant to be, without his shadow dimming her light. And as she packed her final box that night, she made a promise to herself she would thrive. Not for his approval, but in spite of his absence. Yet deep down, beneath the resolve, a quiet question lingered. Like smoke in an empty room, will he ever come looking for me? When I'm gone, the answer wouldn't come for months. "Be not north," Clara said, voice thick. "True, as in your truth, your path. Never let anyone convince you it's wrong." Livia hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of lavender and old books, her mother's armor against a life of quiet endurance. Then came the moment she'd both dreaded and rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. Victor appeared at the study doorway, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. He didn't approach, didn't offer to carry her bags. Just stood there, as if observing a scene he hadn't written. "You have everything?" he asked, voice flat. "Yes," Livia replied, clutching the compass. He nodded. "Good. Oxford's prestigious. Don't waste it." "No, I'm proud." "No, I'll miss you. Not even a be safe. Just don't waste it." As if her success were a transaction, not a triumph. Sophia rushed down the stairs then, breathless, holding a wrapped parcel. "Wait, I made this for you." She thrust it into Livia's arms. A handmade journal, its cover stitched with wildflowers pressed between linen. On the first page, in careful script, "For the stories you haven't told yet." Livia's throat tightened. "Thank you, Sophia." Sophia bit her lip. I didn't know it would be like this. I never wanted to take your place." "You didn't," Livia said softly. "He gave it away." Sophia looked toward Victor, who turned his gaze to the window. The car horn beeped gently. Livia took a deep breath, stepped toward the door, then paused. Without turning, she said, voice steady but trembling beneath. "You once told me I was cold, Dad. But cold people don't wait years for a single kind word. Cold people don't cry when their father chooses someone else over them. Cold people don't hope." She finally turned to face him. "I'm not cold. I'm just tired of burning for someone who won't look at the flame." Victor opened his mouth, but no words came. And in that silence, Livia saw it, the flicker of understanding. Too late, too small, but real. She walked out. The car pulled away. Through the rear window, she watched the mansion shrink. The place where she'd learned to fold herself smaller, quieter, less demanding. where she'd practiced piano alone in the East Wing while Sophia played center stage, where she'd eaten dinner in silence while her father praised another girl's laugh. Now she was free, but freedom, she'd soon learn, doesn't erase longing. 3 weeks into Oxford, Livia thrived. Academically, socially, emotionally. She joined a poetry collective, volunteered at a refugee tutoring center, wrote letters to Clara every Sunday. But at night, alone in her dorm room, she'd stare at the compass on her desk and wonder, did he notice I'm gone? Back in Montecito, the house felt hollow. Victor tried to fill it with noise. More concerts, more galas, more gifts for Sophia. But the piano music sounded empty without Livia's quiet presence in the background, sketching or reading. The dining table felt too large. Even the roses in the garden seemed to droop. One evening, Sophia found him in the library, staring at an old photo. Livia at age 10, holding a science fair trophy, grinning with missing front teeth. "She used to leave her drawings on my desk," he murmured, not looking up. "Little sketches of birds, constellations. I never kept them. Threw them out with the mail." Sophia sat beside him. "Why did you push her away?" He didn't answer at first. Then, voice barely audible, "Because every time I looked at her, I saw how I failed her. And it was easier to pretend she didn't need me than to face that I wasn't enough." Sophia swallowed. "But she did need you, and you chose me instead." "I thought I was giving her strength," he said, running a thumb over the photo. "By not coddling her, by making her tough. You made her lonely," Sophia corrected gently. "There's a difference." That night, Victor went to Livia's old room for the first time since she left. Everything was gone except one thing, taped to the mirror, a note in her handwriting. "If you ever come looking for me, don't bring excuses. Bring change." He stood there for an hour, reading it over and over, as if the words might rearrange themselves into forgiveness. They didn't. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Livia received an email from the Rhodes Trust. Her essay on the cost of conditional love had been selected for publication. She almost deleted it, until she remembered Clara's words, "Let your light burn so bright, he can't ignore it." She hit publish. And somewhere, in a mansion filled with silence, a man who once believed love was earned through perfection began to understand the daughter he'd cast aside hadn't needed him to be perfect. She just needed him to be there. But the true reckoning that was still coming. And when it did, it wouldn't arrive with fanfare, but with a knock on a door and a voice stripped bare of pride, because Livia was coming home. Not for long, just a 10-day break between terms, but enough to stir the quiet unease that had settled over the house since her departure. Sophia had been practicing a new piece for weeks, hoping to impress her. Clara had quietly redecorated the East Wing guest room, Livia's old room. Soft blues and warm woods. Nothing too personal, nothing too permanent. Just enough to say, "You're welcome here," without saying, "We expect you to stay." Victor said nothing, but he'd canceled 2 business trips. And for the first time in years, he'd asked the chef to prepare Livia's favorite dessert, lemon tart with lavender honey. The night before her flight landed, he stood in his study, staring at the published Rhodes essay on his tablet. The title glowed softly in the dark, "When Love Has a Price Tag." He read it again and again, each sentence a scalpel, precise and unflinching. Conditional love doesn't build, it erodes. It tells a child, "I'll cherish you when you stop being who you are and become who I need you to be." He closed the screen, rubbed his temples. His reflection in the window looked older, tired, haunted. The next afternoon, Livia stepped out of the car in a charcoal wool coat. Hair longer now, eyes sharper, posture straighter. She carried one suitcase and a canvas tote filled with books. No fanfare, no tears, just quiet certainty. Sophia ran to her first, hugging her tightly. "You look amazing." Livia smiled, genuine if guarded. "So do you. That dress is stunning." Clara followed, eyes glistening. They held each other without words. Some wounds heal in silence. Then came Victor. He stood at the doorway, hands clasped behind his back, as if bracing for inspection. "Welcome home," he said, voice carefully neutral. Thank you, Livia replied, equally measured. For having me. Not Dad. Not I missed you. Just, thank you. The tension crackled like static. That evening, the family gathered for an intimate dinner. Just the four of them. Candles flickered. Wine poured. For a while, conversation flowed easily. Oxford lectures, Sophia's Juilliard audition, Clara's new garden project. But beneath the surface, something coiled tighter with every passing minute. Then, during dessert, Victor cleared his throat. I read your essay, he said, looking directly at Livia. She set her fork down. I assumed you would. It was powerful, he admitted, but harsh. Truth often is, she said quietly. You made it sound like I never loved you. I wrote what I felt, she replied, not what I wished for. Sophia shifted uncomfortably. Clara watched them both, breath held. Victor leaned forward, voice low but firm. You have everything now, Oxford, acclaim, independence. Why drag our family through the mud in public? Livia's eyes flashed. Not with anger, but with sorrow. Because someone needed to say it. Because there are girls out there right now, sitting at dinner tables just like this, wondering why they're not enough. And maybe, just maybe, my words will tell them they are. You could have told me privately, he said, jaw tightening. And would you have listened, she asked, voice breaking slightly. Or would you have called me dramatic again? Cold, ungrateful silence fell like a guillotine. Then, louder, trembling with emotion she hadn't planned to show, you praised Sophia for playing Chopin with feeling. But when I won the National Science Fair, you asked if I'd finally learned to smile for photos. When I got into every Ivy League school, you said, good. Now you won't cost me tuition. When I left, you didn't ask if I was scared. You just said, don't waste it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I wasn't asking for praise, Dad. I was asking to be seen. Victor opened his mouth, but no defense came. Only shame. Sophia stood abruptly, eyes wet. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know it hurt you this much. You weren't supposed to, Livia said gently. He made sure of that. Victor finally spoke, voice raw. I thought I was preparing you for the world, making you strong. You made me feel like my worth depended on achievement, Livia said. Not on simply existing, not on being your daughter. Clara reached across the table and took Livia's hand. She's right, Victor. Love shouldn't be earned. It should be given, freely, fiercely, even when it's hard. Victor looked at his hands. Hands that had signed billion-dollar deals but never held his daughter when she cried. Hands that had bought Sophia a piano but never turned a page of Livia's sketchbook. I didn't know how to love you the way you needed, he admitted, voice cracking. I only knew how to love the way I was loved. Through performance. Through results. Then learn, Livia said, standing. Because I'm not that little girl waiting for your approval anymore. But if you want a relationship with the woman I've become, it starts with honesty. Not excuses. She walked out, not in anger, but in clarity. Upstairs, she unpacked slowly, heart pounding. She hadn't planned to say so much, but the words had risen like tide, impossible to hold back. Downstairs, Victor sat alone in the darkening dining room, the untouched lemon tart before him. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then dialed his assistant. Cancel the gala speech tomorrow, he said, and pull the foundation sponsorship from the Juilliard showcase. But sir, the board expects. I don't care what they expect, he said, voice firm. My daughter is home, and for once, I'm going to show up for her. Behind a loose panel near the old cedar trunk, something she'd discovered as a child playing hide and seek, she found a shoebox wrapped in faded blue ribbon. Her name was written on it in her father's handwriting, younger, looser than it was now. Hands trembling, she opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to her, none ever sent. Livia, today you turned 6. You drew me a picture of us fishing. I kept it in my wallet for months. I wish I'd told you how much it meant. You got into the gifted program. I wanted to take you out for ice cream, but the Tokyo merger closed late. I'll make it up to you. I saw you crying after the recital. I should have hugged you. Instead, I told you to toughen up. I'm sorry. Each page was dated, spanning years, birthdays, school plays, quiet moments he'd witnessed but never acknowledged. At the bottom of the box lay a final envelope, newer than the rest. Inside, a single sheet. I don't know how to fix this. Every time I try to speak, the words feel too small for the damage I've done. But if you ever read this, know that I see you now, and I always should have. Livia sank to the floor, tears streaming silently. This wasn't the father she knew, the distant, critical man who measured love in achievements. This was someone else. Someone who'd felt, who'd regretted, who'd stayed silent out of pride or fear or both. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. She looked up to see Victor standing in the doorway, face pale, eyes wide with panic. "You weren't supposed to find those," he whispered. "Why didn't you send them?" she asked, voice raw. He stepped inside slowly, as if approaching something fragile. "Because once I started writing, I realized how much I'd failed, and I didn't know how to face you after that. So you chose silence," she said. "Again. I thought, if I acted like everything was fine, maybe it would be," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But seeing you at Oxford, reading your words, it shattered that illusion." Livia stood, clutching the unsent letter. "All these years I thought you didn't care, that I wasn't enough." "You were always enough," he said, voice breaking. "I just didn't know how to love without conditions. My father never did, and I repeated it like a curse." From the hallway, Sophia appeared, holding 2 mugs of tea. She'd heard everything. "I found Elena's old things last week," she said softly, stepping in a storage unit Mom left behind. There were photos, letters, and a diary. Victor stiffened. "You shouldn't have read that. She wrote about you," Sophia continued, ignoring him, "about how she begged you to stay when she got pregnant. How you said you couldn't abandon your family, Clara, Livia, but that you'd always carry her in your heart." She looked at Livia. She also wrote that she never blamed Clara. She blamed herself for loving a man who belonged to someone else. Livia's breath caught. "So all this time you weren't choosing Sophia because she was better. You were trying to fix a mistake you made 20 years ago." Victor nodded, eyes glistening. "I thought if I gave her the life I denied her mother, maybe I could undo the guilt. But you punished me instead," Livia whispered. "No," he said fiercely. "I punished myself, and you paid the price." Sophia set the mugs down and walked to Livia. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea I was part of this ghost story." Livia looked from Sophia to her father. 2 people bound by a past that wasn't hers, yet had shaped her entire life. "What do we do now?" she asked, voice small. Victor took a step forward, hesitant. "I don't expect forgiveness, but if you'll let me, I'd like to try again. Not as the father who failed you, but as the man who finally sees you." Livia studied him, the lines around his eyes deeper now, the arrogance gone, replaced by something raw and human. Outside, the snow had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the attic window. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. Instead, she handed him the unsent letter. "Start by saying these words out loud. To my face." He took it, hands shaking, opened it, looked into her eyes. "I see you, Livia," he said, voice thick. "And I always should have." And for the first time in her life, she believed him. Not because he promised to change, but because he finally admitted he was wrong. Yet even as warmth flickered between them, a shadow lingered, because Sophia, watching quietly, suddenly remembered something from Elena's diary, a name, a date, a secret even Victor didn't know. Livia noticed it first. "Sophia, what is it?" Sophia hesitated, then turned, voice low. "There's something else in Elena's diary. Something I didn't tell you." Victor stiffened. "Sophia, don't." "No," she said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "You both deserve to know." She took a breath. "Elena wrote that. She wasn't sure Victor was my father." Silence crashed down like glass. Livia blinked. "What?" Sophia's voice trembled. She'd been seeing someone else around the same time, briefly before she knew she was pregnant. She never told Victor because she wanted to believe it was him, and when he offered to help after she got sick, she let him think I was his. She thought it would give me a better life. Victor staggered back as if struck. That's not possible. She told me. She lied, Sophia whispered. Not out of malice, out of hope. She loved you enough to want me to have your name, your protection, even if I didn't have your blood. Livia's mind reeled. All this time, the favoritism, the sacrifices, the way Victor had poured everything into Sophia, it had all been built on a lie. A beautiful, tragic lie. And yet, she looked at Sophia, not with anger, but with sudden, aching clarity. So you're not even his daughter. I don't know who my father is, Sophia admitted, tears welling. But I do know this: I never wanted to take your place. And I never asked for any of this. Victor sank onto an old trunk, head in his hands. All these years, I abandoned my own daughter to make up for a debt that wasn't even real. His voice cracked. I chose a ghost over the living. Livia stepped forward, not toward him, but toward Sophia. She took her hand. You're still my sister, not by blood, maybe, but by everything that matters. Sophia burst into tears, clinging to her. I'm so sorry, Livia, for everything. Clara appeared in the doorway then, having heard the raised voices. She took in the scene. The unsent letters, the diary, the shattered expressions, and understood instantly. Without a word, she walked to Victor and knelt beside him. You can't change the past, she said softly, but you can choose what you do now. He looked up at her, eyes hollow. How do I fix this? You start by loving the daughter who's right in front of you, Clara said, glancing at Livia. Not the idea of one you lost, or the one you imagined. That evening, the four of them sat in the sunroom, the same place where Livia had once felt invisible. Now, the air was different, lighter, raw but honest. Sophia spoke first. I've applied to Juilliard, but I don't want you paying for it, Victor. I'll work, take loans. I need to stand on my own. Victor nodded slowly. I understand. Then he turned to Livia. And you, I know I can't undo what I did. But if you'll let me, I'd like to visit you in Oxford. Not as a benefactor, just as your father. Livia studied him, the man who had spent years looking through her, now finally seeing her. She didn't say yes, not yet, but she didn't say no. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. I wrote this on the plane. I wasn't sure I'd give it to you. She handed it to him. Inside was a single ticket for a flight to London, departing in 2 weeks. Victor's hands shook as he held it. You're giving me a chance. I'm giving you a choice, she corrected gently. Show up as the man you've always been, or the man you want to become. I'll be waiting either way. Outside, the last of the snow melted into the earth, feeding roots that had long been starved. And in that quiet room, 3 lives began to untangle, not with grand declarations, but with small, trembling acts of courage. Yet even as hope flickered, a new question loomed in the silence. If Sophia wasn't Victor's daughter, then who was she, and more importantly, bothered to enter? Then, on a rain-slicked Thursday, everything changed. Livia was packing for her return to Oxford when Clara found her in the library, staring at an email with trembling hands. What is it? Clara asked, voice soft. Livia didn't look up. Oxford just awarded me the Chancellor's Fellowship. Full funding, a research grant, and a solo exhibition at the Ashmolean next spring. Her voice cracked. It's everything I've worked for. Clara smiled, tears in her eyes. Oh, Livia, I'm so proud. But Livia's expression didn't lighten. They want me to present my thesis on inherited silence, the emotional cost of parental absence, at the Global Youth Leadership Summit in Geneva. In 3 weeks. Clara's smile faded. And Victor still hasn't confirmed his flight, Livia whispered. He keeps saying he'll come, but he won't commit. Just then, footsteps echoed in the hall. Victor appeared, holding 2 first-class tickets. I booked the flights, he said, voice steady but eyes uncertain. London. Tomorrow. Livia stared at the tickets like they might vanish. Why now? Because I read your fellowship announcement, he said, and I realized I've spent your whole life missing your milestones. I won't miss this one. Sophia appeared behind him, holding a small wrapped box. I made you something for your exhibit, she said shyly. Inside was a delicate sculpture, a bird mid-flight, carved from olive wood. It's called Unbound, because you're finally free. Livia touched the wings gently. Thank you. That night, over tea, Victor finally asked the question that had haunted him. Do you think we can ever really rebuild what I broke? Livia looked at him, not with bitterness, but with weary honesty. Trust isn't rebuilt in grand gestures, Dad. It's built in moments, like showing up, like listening, like choosing me, even when it's inconvenient. He nodded slowly. Then I choose you, starting now. The next morning, they stood at LAX, the sky pale with dawn. Victor held Livia's suitcase. Sophia hugged her tightly. Clara pressed a kiss to her forehead. Call me the moment you land, Clara whispered. I will, Livia promised. As she walked toward security, she turned back once. Victor stood tall, but his eyes were wet. He raised a hand. Not a wave, but a silent vow. She smiled faintly and stepped through. In London, autumn had begun to paint the city in gold and rust. Livia threw herself into her work. Lectures, research, late nights in the Bodleian Library. But every evening, she checked her phone. No call, no message. Until the third day, a knock at her dorm door. She opened it. And there he stood, coat damp from the rain, eyes wide with awe. You came, she breathed. I told you I would, he said, voice rough, though I nearly turned back 10 times on the plane. Why didn't you? He looked around her tiny room. The books stacked neatly, the compass on her desk, Sophia's bird sculpture on the windowsill. Because this is where you are, and I've spent too long looking everywhere else. Over the next week, something shifted. He attended her seminar, sat in the back, listened intently. He didn't interrupt, didn't boast, just witnessed. Afterward, he found her outside. You were brilliant, he said simply. Not because you were perfect, but because you spoke the truth even when it hurt. Livia's eyes filled. That's all I ever wanted you to see. Later, over dinner at a quiet pub near Christchurch, he asked about her childhood, really asked. Not to defend himself, but to understand. I remember the science fair, he said quietly. You were 9. You built a model of the solar system out of recycled materials. Won first place. I was in Dubai closing a deal. When I got home, your trophy was already on the shelf. I never asked how you did it. I stayed up for 3 nights, she said, gluing planets together with my mom. I wanted you to see it spin. He reached across the table, hesitated, then covered her hand with his. I see it now. And for the first time, she let him. But just as healing began to take root, a letter arrived from a private investigator in San Diego. Sophia had hired him quietly after their conversation in the attic, and the results were inside. Victor opened it that night in his hotel room, heart pounding. The DNA test confirmed it. He was not Sophia's biological father, but the investigator had found something else. A name, Daniel Reyes, a musician, Elena's college sweetheart, deceased 10 years ago, but he'd left behind a sister, and she had been trying to contact Sophia for months. Victor stared at the paper, the weight of another secret pressing down. This wasn't just about paternity anymore. It was about identity. And if he told Sophia now, just as Livia was beginning to trust him again, would it shatter the fragile bridge they'd built, or would it be the truth that finally set them all free? And this time, the truth didn't just belong to him. It belonged to Sophia. He stared at the name again, Maria Reyes, Elena's late brother's sister. A woman who'd left voicemails, letters, even shown up once at the Langston estate, only to be turned away by security on Victor's orders. He'd assumed she was a scammer. Now, he wondered if she'd been trying to give Sophia something far more valuable than money, her roots. His phone buzzed. A video call from Clara. He answered. Her face filled the screen, tired, but calm. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said gently. "I might have," he replied, voice hoarse. "I found out who Sophia's real family is." Clara didn't flinch. And I don't know what to do." He ran a hand through his hair. "Livia's finally letting me in. We're starting to heal. If I tell Sophia now, it could unravel everything. She might feel like she doesn't belong anywhere. Not with us, not with them. Or," Clara said softly, "she might finally feel whole." He looked away. "What if she leaves? What if she stays, but never knows who she really is?" Clara countered. "Victor, love isn't about keeping people close. It's about giving them the truth so they can choose their own path." He swallowed hard. "I'm scared." "I know," she whispered. "But fear isn't a reason to keep secrets. It's a reason to be brave." The next morning, over breakfast in a quiet cafe near the Thames, Livia noticed the shadows under his eyes. "You didn't sleep?" she said, stirring her tea. He hesitated, then slid the letter across the table. "I need your advice." She read it slowly. When she finished, she looked up, eyes wide. "You found her family." "I found a family," he corrected. "But I don't know if I should tell her. Not yet. Not while you and I are rebuilding." Livia studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Dad, you spent years choosing what was easy over what was right. Don't do it again." He flinched. "It's not that simple." "It is," she said. "Sophia deserves to know where she comes from, even if it hurts, even if it changes things, because the truth, it doesn't destroy love. Lies do." Her words settled over him like a verdict. That afternoon, he called Sophia. Her voice was bright. "Hey, how's London? Did you see Livia's exhibit plans? They're incredible." "They are," he said, throat tight. "Sophia, I need to tell you something. Something important." A pause. "Okay. I hired an investigator after what you told us in the attic. And we found your biological father's family." Silence. Then, barely a whisper, "You're sure?" "The DNA confirms it. His name was Daniel Reyes. He passed away years ago, but he has a sister, Maria. She's been trying to reach you." Sophia's breath hitched. All this time, she knew. She wanted to meet you, to tell you about your father, about your mother, about your heritage. Another silence, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but fragile, like glass under pressure. "Do you think she'll want me, or will I just be another ghost from Elena's past?" Victor's heart broke. "You're not a ghost, Sophia. You're real, and you belong with us, with her, wherever you choose." "But what if I choose her?" Sophia asked, voice trembling. "What if I leave?" He closed his eyes. "Then I'll understand, because you deserve to know your story, even if it means I lose you." On the other end, a soft sob. "I don't want to lose you either." "You won't," he said firmly. "Not unless you want to. Family isn't just blood. It's choice. And I choose you no matter what." Later that night, Livia found him standing alone on the bridge near Magdalen College, staring into the dark water. "She's meeting Maria next week," he said without turning. "In San Diego." Livia stepped beside him. "Are you okay?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm proud of her, for wanting to know the truth." They stood in silence as the river flowed beneath them, carrying old things away, making space for new ones. Back in California, Sophia met Maria in a sunlit courtyard near the ocean. The woman was older, silver-haired, with warm brown eyes that mirrored Sophia's own. She held a photo, Daniel and Elena, young and laughing on a beach. "He loved her deeply," Maria said, voice thick. "But he died before he knew about you. Elena kept you a secret to protect you. From gossip, from pain. But she always hoped you'd find your way to us." Sophia touched the photo gently. "Do you think I can be both a Langston and a Reyes?" Maria smiled, tears in her eyes. "Mija, you've always been both. One gave you a home, the other gave you a history. You don't have to choose." When Sophia called Victor that evening, her voice was lighter than he'd ever heard it. "I'm still your daughter," she said simply. no matter what the test says. And for the first time he believed her, not because she owed him loyalty, but because she gave it freely. Yet even as healing bloomed, a storm gathered on the horizon, because Victor's empire, built on pride, secrecy, and control, was beginning to crack. And when the financial reports landed on his desk the following week, themselves into something less catastrophic. They didn't. 2 major investments, tech acquisitions he'd championed personally, had collapsed. A third was under federal investigation for accounting irregularities. The stock had plummeted 42% in 3 weeks. The board was calling an emergency meeting, and his personal assets frozen pending audit. He sat back, heart hammering, the weight of decades of arrogance crashing down. He'd built an empire on control, on always being right, on never showing weakness. And now the foundation was crumbling. Not with a roar, but with silent trading floors, silent phones, silent partners who once called him visionary, now avoiding his calls. He thought of Sophia's Juilliard tuition, Livia's Oxford fellowship. Though funded, she'd need support for housing, research, travel. Clara's quiet life, sustained by the comfort he'd provided. All of it suddenly fragile. Back in Montecito, Sophia sensed the shift before anyone said a word. Victor's voice on their calls grew tighter, shorter. He stopped mentioning future plans. When she asked about the gala sponsorship he'd promised to restore, he changed the subject. One evening, she found Clara in the garden, pruning roses with unusual intensity. "Mom," Sophia said gently, "is something wrong?" Clara didn't look up. "Your father's going through something." "Is it money?" Sophia asked, voice low. Clara finally met her eyes. "It's more than money, sweetheart. It's pride. And when a man like Victor loses both at once, he doesn't know how to ask for help." Meanwhile, in London, Livia noticed the change too. Victor canceled their afternoon walk, missed her seminar, sat for hours staring out the window, phone dark in his lap. "Dad," she said one night, sitting beside him on the couch, "you don't have to pretend with me anymore." He laughed bitterly. "Pretend what? That I'm not watching everything I built turn to dust?" She didn't flinch. "Then let it burn. You're still here. We're still here." "You don't understand," he said, voice raw. "I can't give you the life you deserve. I can't even fund Sophia's education now. I failed you both again." "No," Livia said firmly. "You only fail us if you shut us out. Money isn't love, Dad. You taught me that the hard way. Now let me teach you something. Love is showing up, even when you have nothing left to give." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the daughter he'd neglected, but the woman who refused to let him disappear. 2 days later, the news broke publicly: Langston Holdings plunges amid scandal. CEO under scrutiny. Sophia saw it on her phone during piano practice. Her hands froze over the keys. Without thinking, she called Maria. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "He's losing everything, and I don't even know if I have the right to stay." Maria's voice was calm, steady. "Mija, family isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in presence. Go to him." That same afternoon, Victor stood alone in his study back in Montecito. The mansion suddenly too large, too empty. The staff had been let go. The cars were being repossessed. Even the grand piano in the East Parlor felt like a relic of a life that no longer existed. A knock at the door. He opened it to find Sophia, suitcase in hand, eyes fierce with loyalty. "I'm not leaving," she said before he could speak. "Not now." He tried to protest. "Sophia, I can't even pay your rent." "I'll get a job," she interrupted. "I'll teach piano. I'll clean houses. But I'm not walking away because you're poor. I stayed when you were rich and ignored Livia. Now I stay because you're trying to be better." Tears welled in his eyes. "Why are you so kind to me?" "Because someone has to be," she said softly. "And maybe I'm learning from her." She nodded toward the driveway. Livia stepped out of a taxi, backpack slung over one shoulder, face set with quiet determination. Victor's breath caught. "You came back." "I told you I would," she said, walking up the steps. When you needed me, not when you were impressive. He pulled both girls into a hug then. Awkward, tearful, real. No cameras, no audience. Just three broken people choosing each other in the ruins. But the storm wasn't over. That night, as they sat in the dim kitchen sharing takeout, Victor's phone rang. It was his lawyer. "The SEC is moving forward," the voice said grimly. "They're freezing all remaining assets. You may need to consider selling the estate." Silence fell. Sophia reached for Livia's hand. Livia squeezed back. Victor looked at them, his daughters by blood and by choice, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Livia shook her head. "Don't be. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something honest." Outside, the wind howled through the palms, stripping away the last illusions. And in that moment, stripped of wealth, power, and pride, Victor Langston finally understood he hadn't lost everything. He'd been given a second chance to love without conditions. Victor stood in the empty library, hands in his pockets, watching dust motes swirl in the afternoon light. This was where he'd read Livia bedtime stories until she was 7, until board meetings and mergers stole those nights away. He picked up a single book left behind The Little Prince. Her favorite. He opened it. On the inside cover, in her childhood handwriting for Dad, "So you remember what matters." His throat tightened. Behind him, footsteps echoed softly. Sophia appeared holding 2 mugs of tea. "We're almost done packing the kitchen," she said, handing him one. "Livia's on the phone with Oxford. She's arranging a sublet for us near campus. Just until things settle." He nodded, unable to speak. "You're quiet," she said gently. "I keep thinking," he began, voice rough. "All this time, I thought wealth was protection. That if I gave you everything, schools, clothes, opportunities, you'd never feel the pain I felt growing up poor. But I gave you things instead of myself. And now, I have nothing left to give." Sophia set her mug down and faced him. "You still have yourself, Dad. And that's all we ever wanted." Just then, Livia walked in, phone tucked under her chin. "Yes, Professor Hayes, thank you. I'll send the revised proposal tonight." She ended the call and looked at them both. "Good news. The Fellowship Committee approved emergency housing support for family members of scholars facing hardship." She smiled faintly. "Turns out, family includes the people you choose." Victor stared at her. "You did that for us." "I did it for us," she corrected. "Because we're not losing each other. Not now." That night, as they sat on the floor of the nearly empty living room, eating takeout from paper containers, laughing over old photos found in a forgotten drawer, Victor's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Mr. Langston, this is Daniel Reyes, attorney. Maria asked me to reach out. There's something Elena left for Sophia. Something she wanted her to have when the time was right." His blood ran cold. He showed the message to Sophia. Her eyes widened. "What could it be?" "I don't know," he said. "But we'll find out together." 2 days later, they met the attorney in a modest office in San Diego. The man handed Sophia a sealed envelope and a small wooden box. Inside the envelope was a letter. "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, you've found your way home. To both families. I never meant to deceive Victor. I only wanted you to have stability, love, safety. But I also wanted you to know your truth. Inside the box is your father's journal. He wrote it for you, hoping one day you'd exist. He called you Mi Estrella, my star. You are loved twice over. Never forget that." Mama Sophia opened the box with trembling hands. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, worn at the edges, filled with sketches of constellations, poems in Spanish, and one page titled, "For my daughter, if I ever have one." She read aloud, voice breaking, "I hope you're brave. I hope you laugh loudly. I hope you never doubt your worth. And if life gives you 2 families, love them both. Because love isn't divided. It multiplies." Tears streamed down her face. Livia wrapped an arm around her. Victor watched them. His daughters, bound not by blood, but by shared loss and stubborn grace. and felt something shift inside him, not regret, but reverence. Later, as they walked back to the car, Sophia turned to Victor. I want to use my father's music in my Juilliard audition. His compositions. Will you help me find them? He nodded, eyes glistening. Every note. That evening, back in their temporary apartment, a tiny two-bedroom above a bookstore, Livia sat at the kitchen table, drafting a new essay. The title glowed on her laptop screen, The Architecture of Belonging When Family is Built, Not Born. Victor poured tea and sat beside her. You're writing again. I have to, she said softly. Because someone out there needs to hear this. You don't need a mansion to be loved. You just need people who stay. He reached over and covered her hand with his. No words, just presence. And in that quiet moment, stripped of everything but truth, they finally began to heal. Not as the rich man and his daughter's charity shop. He no longer checked stock prices. He checked on Livia's heating bill, on Sophia's audition schedule, on whether Clara had received her weekly letter. But pride, even broken, doesn't vanish overnight. One afternoon, as he sorted laundry in the cramped bathroom, he found an old business card tucked in the pocket of his last suit, the one he'd worn to board meetings. Langston Holdings chairman and CEO. He stared at it, fingers tracing the embossed letters, and for a moment, the ghost of who he used to be whispered in his ear, you were somebody. Now you're nobody. He crumpled the card and dropped it in the bin. That evening, over stew simmered from donated groceries, Livia noticed the shadows under his eyes. You're not sleeping, she said gently. He stirred his spoon absently. I keep thinking, what if I'd made different choices? What if I'd seen you sooner? Maybe none of this would have happened. Sophia looked up from her sheet music. You can't rewrite the past, Dad. But you're writing something new now. He gave a faint smile. It's just hard to be just Victor after being Victor Langston for so long. You're more than your name, Livia said. You always were. You just forgot. Later that week, he took a job. Not as a consultant, not as an advisor, but as a night clerk at the university library. Minimum wage. No title. Just a desk, a lamp, and silence. The first night, a student approached, squinting at his name tag. Langston, the boy asked. Like, the Langston. Victor hesitated, then nodded. Just Victor now. The student blinked. My dad lost everything in your tech crash. Our house, gone. His voice cracked. But hey, I got into Oxford anyway. Guess I didn't need your money after all. Victor's breath caught. I'm sorry, he said, voice raw. Truly. The boy studied him a moment, then shrugged. You're working here. That's something. And it was. Back at the flat, Sophia played a new piece, her father Daniel's composition, unearthed from his journal. It was haunting, tender, full of longing. When she finished, tears glistened on her cheeks. He wrote this for me, she whispered, before I existed. Livia sat beside her. He loved you into being, even from afar. Victor stood in the doorway, unseen, heart breaking open. He'd spent years trying to fill a void with wealth, with control, with the illusion of perfection. But here, in this cold flat, with two daughters who'd chosen him despite everything, he finally felt rich. Yet the past wasn't done with him. One rainy Tuesday, a letter arrived from Montecito. Not from Clara, from the new owner of the estate. Enclosed was a photo of the grand piano, now polished and gleaming in the east parlor, beneath a crystal chandelier. On the bench sat a little girl, playing with clumsy joy. On the back, a note, thought you'd like to know. She's learning Chopin, just like Sophia. Victor stared at the image, throat tight. That piano had been his gift to Sophia, a symbol of everything he thought love should look like: grand, expensive, visible. But real love, he now knew, wasn't in grand gestures. It was in showing up when you had nothing left to give. That night, he sat at the small, upright piano Sophia had rented from a local music school. He placed his hands on the keys, clumsy, untrained, and played a single note, then another. Slowly, haltingly, he began to play the lullaby he used to hum to Livia when she was small. He'd forgotten the melody, but she hadn't. She appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. You remember that I never forgot, he said softly. I just stopped singing. She walked over and leaned her head on his shoulder as he played, off-key but earnest. Sophia joined them, resting her hand on his back. No audience, no gala, no applause, just three souls stitching themselves back together note by note. But outside, the wind carried whispers of what was coming. The SEC hearing loomed. Creditors circled. And though Livia's fellowship covered basics, the future remained uncertain. Still, as the fire crackled low and the piano's final note faded into silence, Victor realized something profound. He wasn't afraid anymore, because he finally understood he hadn't lost everything. He'd been stripped down to what mattered. And in that bareness, he found the man he was always meant to be, not a titan of industry. Victor hadn't missed a single rehearsal. He sat in the back of the lecture hall each evening, listening as her voice grew stronger, clearer, weaving pain into purpose. He no longer flinched at the word father in her speech. Instead, he leaned forward, absorbing every truth she spoke, not as accusation, but as invitation. 2 nights before the gala, Sophia came home from her final Juilliard audition prep session, eyes bright. They loved Daniel's piece, she said, breathless. They said it was hauntingly original, and they offered me a partial scholarship. Victor pulled her into a hug, his voice thick. You did it, mi estrella. She laughed through tears. We did it. Later that night, as Victor washed dishes in the tiny kitchen, Livia found an email in her inbox from the gala organizers. Attached was the guest list. Her breath caught. Victor Langston, RSVP declined. Her heart dropped. She turned to him, dish towel in hand. You didn't RSVP, he paused, hands still in soapy water. I assumed you wouldn't want me there. Not after everything. After everything, she echoed, stunned. Dad, this speech is about us. About how we're choosing each other now. If you're not there, it's just words. He looked down. I don't belong in those rooms anymore, Livia. I'm not the man who walks in with a tailored suit and a boardroom title. I'm just a clerk, a father trying to make amends. And that's exactly who I want in the audience, she said firmly. Not the CEO, the man who stayed. He swallowed hard. What if people stare? What if they whisper? Let them, she said, stepping closer. Because I'll be standing on that stage saying the most powerful thing I've ever said, that love isn't earned through success. It's given through presence. And you've shown up. Every day. Even when it hurt. He met her eyes, and for the first time he saw not judgment, but pride. I'll be there, he whispered. The night of the gala arrived under a sky dusted with stars. The Sheldonian Theater glowed with golden light, guests in elegant attire flowing up the stone steps. Victor stood at the edge of the crowd in a borrowed navy suit. Sophia had insisted, and a simple white shirt. No cufflinks, no watch, just clean hands and a quiet heart. Inside, he found a seat near the back, as always. But as the lights dimmed and Livia stepped onto the stage, poised, radiant, unshaken, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Clara. She'd flown in without telling anyone, her silver hair swept up, eyes glistening. She squeezed his arm and sat beside him. You look like you belong here, she murmured. I feel like I don't, he admitted. Then stay anyway, she said softly. That's what love does. Livia began to speak. Her voice filled the hall, clear and steady. For years, I believed I had to earn love through achievement. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect silence. I thought if I became extraordinary, my father would finally see me. But love shouldn't be a reward for performance. It should be the foundation we stand on, even when we fall. Victor's eyes burned. My father chose someone else once. Not because I wasn't enough, but because he didn't know how to love without conditions. But here's the truth I've learned: people can change. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But in small, daily choices. To listen, to stay, to say I'm sorry, even when it's hard. She paused, scanning the crowd. Her gaze landed on him. And sometimes, The person who hurt you the most becomes the one who teaches you the deepest lesson that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to walk forward together, scars and all. A hush fell over the room. Then, thunderous applause. But Victor didn't hear it, because in that moment, as Livia smiled at him, really smiled with her whole heart, he saw it the little girl who'd waited years for his attention, now standing tall, offering him grace. Afterward, guests swarmed her, congratulations, interviews, offers. But she excused herself gently and walked straight to the back row. She stopped before him. No words, just opened her arms. He stepped into her embrace, holding her tighter than he ever had, as if making up for every missed hug, every silent dinner, every unsent letter. "I'm proud of you," he whispered into her hair. She pulled back, eyes shining. "I'm proud of us." Outside, the night air was cool and sweet. Clara linked arms with Sophia, who carried printed copies of Daniel's sheet music, now officially archived by Juilliard as Reyes Langston Composition No. 1. As they walked toward the river, Victor lingered behind, watching his daughters laugh under the street lamps. Two young women shaped by loss, yet unbroken. One by blood, one by choice, both by love. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a man who'd lost everything. He felt like a man who'd finally found what mattered. But as they turned the corner, a black sedan idled at the curb. A man in a dark coat stepped out, disappeared into the sedan, which melted into the Oxford night like a shadow. Livia turned, sensing his stillness. "Dad," he didn't answer. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. Inside, crisp official lettering confirmed what he already knew: final hearing, Securities and Exchange Commission. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Penalties may include civil fines, asset forfeiture, and potential criminal referral. His breath came shallow. He'd known this day was coming, but not tonight. Not after Livia's speech. Not when, for the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Clara stepped closer, her voice low. "What is it?" He showed her the letter. Her face paled, but she didn't flinch. "Then we face it together." Sophia wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Whatever happens, we're not leaving you." He tried to speak, but his throat closed. How could he tell them that if the worst came true? If they froze his remaining accounts, if they barred him from working in finance? He might not be able to stay in Oxford, that he could be forced to return to the U.S., possibly even face detention back in the flat. Silence settled like fog. Livia made tea, her hands steady, though her eyes betrayed her fear. Sophia sat at the piano, playing Daniel's lullaby softly, not for performance, but for comfort. Victor retreated to the tiny balcony, staring at the moon over the spires of Christ Church. He pulled out a notebook, the same one he'd used for those unsent letters years ago, and began to write. "Livia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Not by choice, but by consequence. I don't expect you to wait. I only ask that you remember this for the first time in my life. I loved you without conditions. And that truth is mine to keep, no matter what they take from me." Dad, he folded the page, tucked it into an envelope, and placed it on her desk. Inside, Livia found him hours later, slumped in the armchair, eyes red-rimmed. "You're not writing another unsent letter," she said firmly, sitting beside him. "I can't risk dragging you down with me," he whispered. "If I'm barred from the country or jailed, you have your fellowship. Sophia has Juilliard. You don't need this weight." "We need you," she said, voice breaking. "Not your money. Not your name. You. The man who stayed up late helping me edit my thesis. Who cried when Sophia played her father's song. Who finally learned to say, 'I'm sorry,' without pride." He looked at her, tears spilling over. "What if I lose everything again?" "Then we'll rebuild," she said, taking his hand. "Together, like we've been doing." Down the hall, Sophia appeared in the doorway holding 2 train tickets. "I booked us seats to London. The hearings at the U.S. Consulate Annex. We're going with you." Victor shook his head. "You shouldn't." "We should," Sophia interrupted. "Because family doesn't abandon each other when the storm hits." They stand in the rain together. The next morning, they walked into the consulate building side by side. No entourage, no lawyers flanking them like armor, just three people bound by something deeper than blood or scandal. The hearing room was cold, sterile. A panel of three officials sat behind a long table. Victor's former attorney, a man he could barely afford now, stood beside him, briefcase worn at the corners. The charges were red negligence, failure to disclose conflicts, reckless oversight. Not fraud, not malice, but enough to ruin what remained of his reputation. Then, unexpectedly, the lead commissioner leaned forward. "Mr. Langston, before we proceed, we've reviewed your recent conduct, your cooperation with investigators, your voluntary restitution efforts, and..." He glanced at a file. A character reference from Dr. Eleanor Hayes of Oxford University, citing your remarkable transformation and commitment to ethical mentorship. Victor blinked. He hadn't asked for that. Livia gave him a small, knowing smile from the front row. The commissioner continued. "Given your clean personal record outside this matter, and your demonstrated remorse, we're prepared to offer a settlement. Full civil penalties payable over 10 years. No criminal referral. But you will be permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company." Relief crashed over him like a wave. He wouldn't go to prison. He could stay. He could be here. But the fine, it was more than he had. Before he could speak, Livia stood. "Your Honor," she said, voice clear and calm. "My father may not have assets, but he has integrity, and he has us. We'll help him meet this obligation. Not because he owes the world, but because he's choosing to make things right." Sophia rose beside her. "And I'll work, teach, perform, whatever it takes." Clara added softly, "We're a family, and families share burdens." The commissioners exchanged glances. One nodded slowly. "Then so be it." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. Victor stood on the steps, breathing deeply, as if surfacing from deep water. Livia took his hand. "Welcome home, Dad." He looked at them, his daughters, his wife, his second chance, and whispered, "I'm not losing you again." And for the first time, he truly believed it. But as they walked away, a single thought lingered in the quiet space between heartbeats. Redemption isn't given. It's lived, day by day, choice by choice, across Europe. Sophia began teaching piano to underprivileged children in East Oxford, using Daniel's compositions as her curriculum, each note a bridge between past and future. They lived simply, shared groceries, took turns cooking, laughed over burnt toast and mismatched socks. The flat, once temporary, became home. Not because of its walls, but because of what grew within them: trust, slow and tender, like ivy climbing stone. But forgiveness, even when offered, isn't always complete. One rainy afternoon, while sorting old mail, Livia found a letter addressed to Victor from a law firm in Geneva. Her breath caught. She recognized the letterhead. It was from the same firm that had handled Elena's estate years ago. Without thinking, she opened it. Inside was a notarized document, a final amendment to Elena's will, dated just weeks before her death. In it, she'd left Sophia a modest trust fund, enough to cover Juilliard, housing, even a small stipend for years. But there was a condition: only if Victor Langston is not named guardian or financial manager. Elena hadn't trusted him, not with Sophia's future. Livia's hands shook. She didn't want to tell him, not after everything. But secrets had broken them once. She wouldn't let silence do it again. That evening, over lentil soup and crusty bread, she placed the letter on the table. Victor read it slowly. His face didn't crumble, just went still, like a lake before a storm. "So she never believed I'd truly care for her," he said quietly. Sophia reached for his hand. "She was scared, Dad. Not of you, of losing me. She didn't know you'd change." "But she was right," he whispered. "Back then, I wouldn't have deserved it. I saw Sophia as a redemption project, not a person." Livia leaned forward. "But you see her now, and that's what matters." He looked up, eyes glistening. "Do you think I've earned the right to be called her father, even without blood, even without money. Sophia didn't hesitate. You earned it the night you stayed up with me when I had nightmares about not belonging. You earned it when you canceled your board meeting to hear me play my first full sonata. You earned it when you chose us over your pride. She squeezed his hand. Dad, you've been my father since the day you decided to stay. Victor bowed his head, tears falling into his lap. Later that night, Livia found him on the balcony, staring at the stars. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, he admitted. For someone to say I don't deserve this peace. Maybe you don't, she said gently, standing beside him. But maybe grace isn't about deserving. Maybe it's about accepting it when it's offered. He turned to her. Do you forgive me, Livia, truly? She was silent for a long moment. Then, I forgave you the day you showed up at my dorm door in the rain. But forgiving isn't forgetting. It's choosing to walk forward with someone who's trying to be better, even if they stumble. He nodded, throat tight. And if I stumble again, I'll be there to help you up, she said. Because that's what family does. The next morning, Victor made a decision. He called the Geneva law firm and declined the trust fund on Sophia's behalf. When Sophia asked why, he said simply, because I want you to know you're with me because you choose to be. Not because of money. Not because of obligation. Because you love me. And I love you. She hugged him so tightly he couldn't breathe. Weeks later, Livia received an invitation. The Ashmolean Museum wanted to feature her essay alongside a new exhibit on modern family love beyond blood. They asked her to speak at the opening. She accepted, but only on one condition. My father speaks with me, she told the curator. Not as Victor Langston, CEO, but as Victor Langston, father. The night before the event, Victor sat at the kitchen table drafting his speech. He wrote and rewrote, crumpling page after page. Nothing felt worthy. Livia found him at 2 a.m., surrounded by paper. Stop trying to be perfect, she said, sitting beside him. Just be honest. He looked at her. What if I say the wrong thing? What if you say the right thing? And it changes someone's life, she countered softly. Like your daughter's. He took a breath and began again. I spent most of my life believing love was a transaction. Something earned through success, performance, control. I gave my daughter conditions instead of comfort. I chose illusion over truth. But grace doesn't arrive when we're worthy. It arrives when we're broken. And in that brokenness, my daughters chose me anyway. That's the miracle I stand before you to share today. Family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, again and again, with humility, with courage, with love that doesn't keep score. The next evening, under the museum's grand dome, Victor stood beside Livia at the podium. Cameras flashed. Guests murmured. But all he saw was her. His brilliant, resilient daughter, smiling at him with quiet pride. Afterward, as guests mingled around Daniel's newly framed journal and Sophia's piano recordings playing softly in the background, a young woman approached Victor. She held a copy of Livia's published essay. My father left when I was 6, she said, voice trembling. I've spent my whole life wondering if I wasn't enough. Your words, they made me feel seen. Victor looked at Livia, then back at the girl. Tell him you're enough, he said gently. Even if he never says it back. Because you are. As the crowd thinned, Clara appeared, holding 3 cups of tea. You were wonderful, she said, kissing Victor's cheek. Sophia joined them, eyes bright. Juilliard just confirmed. They're adding Daniel's composition to their permanent repertoire. They're calling it the Langston Reyes Lullaby. Victor laughed. A real unguarded sound. He'd be proud. Livia slipped her arm through his. We all are. And in that moment, beneath the glow of museum lights and the weight of healed wounds, Victor Langston finally understood he hadn't just been forgiven. He'd been remade. Not by wealth. Not by power. Started a small non-profit, Harmony Roots, teaching piano to refugee children, using Daniel's compositions as the foundation. Victor helped her file the paperwork. Not as a financier. As a father. One afternoon, as they sat in a sun-dappled cafe near the Bodleian, Sophia slid a brochure across the table. It showed a modest community center in East London. Peeling paint, mismatched chairs, a single upright piano in the corner. "I found it," she said, eyes shining. "It's perfect. Rent is low, the neighborhood needs it, and the kids. They've never touched a piano before." Victor studied the photo. "You're going to build something real here." "I want to," she said softly. "Something that honors both my fathers, the one who gave me life and the one who gave me love." He reached across and squeezed her hand. "Daniel would be proud, and so am I." But later that week, as Victor sorted mail in the flat, he found a letter addressed to Sophia from Juilliard. His heart leapt until he saw the tone. The dean expressed concern. "While your community work is commendable, full commitment to the conservatory is expected. Hybrid arrangements may jeopardize your standing." He didn't tell her right away. He wanted to protect her. But Livia caught him staring at the letter, face tight with worry. "What is it?" she asked. He showed her. She read it, then sighed. "You can't shield her from this, Dad. She deserves to decide for herself." That night, over dinner, Sophia noticed the tension. "Okay," she said, setting down her fork. "What's wrong?" Victor hesitated, then handed her the letter. She read it slowly. When she finished, she didn't cry, didn't rage, just sat quietly, fingers tracing the edge of the paper. Then she looked up. "I won't abandon them," she said firmly. "Those kids, they wait for me every Tuesday. One of them just played her first scale yesterday." She cried. Said no one ever told her she could make something beautiful. Livia nodded. "Then don't choose between Juilliard and them. Redefine what success looks like." Sophia turned to Victor. "What do you think?" He took a breath. "I used to believe success was measured in headlines, in net worth, in grand stages. But watching you teach that little girl to play, that's legacy. That's real." She smiled faintly. "Even if it means losing Juilliard." "Even then," he said, "because you're not losing yourself." 2 days later, Sophia wrote a letter to the dean. Not an apology, but a declaration. "I cannot separate art from service. My music lives where it's needed most. If that disqualifies me from your institution, so be it. But I will not stop playing for those who've never heard a lullaby." She sent it without telling anyone. The reply came a week later. She opened it at the kitchen table, hands trembling. Livia and Victor stood behind her, silent. Her eyes scanned the page. Then she gasped. "They're not expelling me," she whispered. "They're creating a new track. Music and social impact. They want me to design the curriculum. And they're funding a pilot program in London." Victor pulled her into a hug, tears in his eyes. "You changed them." "No," she said, smiling through tears. "We changed each other." That weekend, they visited the community center together. The walls were still bare, the floorboards creaked, but sunlight poured through the tall windows. A group of children, Syrian, Somali, Ukrainian, waited shyly by the piano. Sophia sat down and began to play Daniel's lullaby. As the notes filled the room, one little girl stepped forward, placed her small hand on the piano, and hummed along. Victor watched, heart full. This was the world he'd missed for so long. Not boardrooms, not galas, but moments like this, raw, tender, alive. Later, as they walked home through the park, Livia linked arms with him. "You know," she said softly, "you could teach too. Business ethics, mentorship. You've got decades of hard-won wisdom." He chuckled. "Who'd listen to a fallen tycoon?" "I would," she said. "And so would others. Because you're not fallen, Dad. You're risen." He stopped walking, looked at her. "How did I get so lucky?" "You didn't," she said gently. "You chose to stay. And that made all the difference." That night, as rain tapped softly on the roof, Victor sat at the small desk in the corner of the living room, the same one Livia used for her research, and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "Redemption isn't a destination. It's a daily practice. Today, I taught a boy how to balance a budget. Tomorrow, I'll listen when my daughter speaks. And every day, I'll choose love over pride. Outside, the city slept. Inside, three souls, once fractured, now fused by grace, breathed in unison. And in the quiet, a new legacy began to bloom, not of wealth, but of presence. Not of perfection, but of courage. Playing softly from a speaker in the corner. Sophia had just been featured in a BBC documentary about music as healing, and Livia's thesis was being adapted into a university course on emotional resilience. Victor, now a guest lecturer at the said business school, taught a seminar titled Leadership After Loss Rebuilding with Integrity. Students didn't know his past, only that he spoke with a rare honesty that made them lean in, listen, change. But beneath the surface, something stirred. One evening, as Victor sorted donated books for the center's new reading nook, he found a familiar envelope tucked inside an old copy of The Little Prince. His hands stilled. It was addressed to him in his own handwriting. One of the unsent letters from years ago. He'd forgotten he'd hidden it there during the move. He opened it. Livia turns 18 today. I should be throwing her a party. Instead, I'm signing merger papers in Tokyo. I told myself it was for her future. But the truth is, I'm running. From her disappointment, from my guilt, from the fear that I'll never be enough. If she ever reads this, tell her I saw her. Even when I looked away, his breath caught. He hadn't written that in years. And yet, here it was, proof that even in his worst moments, some part of him had known the truth. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching snow fall silently over the spires, and realized he'd spent so long seeking redemption that he'd forgotten to simply live it. The next morning, he called Livia. I need to do something, he said, voice low. Not for forgiveness, not for legacy, just because it's right. She met him at the riverbank, wrapped in a thick scarf, eyes curious. What is it? He took a deep breath. I want to visit the shelter where you volunteered as a teen, the one I never asked about. She studied him. Why now? Because I missed too much, he said. And I can't get those years back. But I can show up now. So they went. The shelter was smaller than he remembered, warm, crowded, alive with the hum of survival. A coordinator recognized Livia immediately. You're back. The kids still talk about your poetry workshops. Then she turned to Victor. And you must be her father. He nodded, throat tight. I am. Later, as they helped serve meals, a teenage girl with tired eyes handed Victor a drawing. A man and a girl holding hands under a tree. On the back, she'd written, family isn't who you're born to. It's who stays. He held it like sacred text. On the walk home, Livia slipped her arm through his. You okay? He looked at her, snow catching in her lashes. I keep thinking, what if I'd come here with you back then? What if I'd seen how you gave your time to people who had nothing? While I chased more. You're here now, she said gently. That's what matters. But that night, something shifted in him. Not regret, but resolve. The next week, he walked into the dean's office at Oxford and proposed a new initiative, the Langston Fellowship for Ethical Leadership. Fully funded by his modest earnings, Clara's inheritance, and a small grant Livia helped secure. It would support students from marginalized backgrounds pursuing careers in social impact, with mentorship from former executives rebuilding their legacies. When the dean asked why he'd name it after himself, Victor said simply, so people remember that even the broken can build something beautiful. The announcement came just before Christmas. Reporters called. Former colleagues reached out, some skeptical, some hopeful. But Victor only cared about one response. Sophia hugged him fiercely after reading the press release. You're not hiding anymore. No, he said, smiling. I'm finally proud of who I'm becoming. Then, on a gray afternoon 2 days before the holidays, a knock came at the door. Victor opened it and froze. Standing on the step was a man in his late 50s, eyes weary but kind, holding a worn leather satchel. Mr. Langston, the man said. My name is Robert Hayes. I was the CFO of Langston Holdings from 2008 to 2015. I lost everything after the collapse. My house, my marriage. I've been working odd jobs ever since. Victor's chest tightened. He remembered Robert. Loyal, quiet, always the first to arrive, last to leave. I read about your fellowship, Robert continued, voice cracking, and I just needed to see if it was real, if you really changed. Victor stepped aside. Come in. Over tea, Robert confessed how he'd blamed Victor for years, until he read Livia's essay. It made me realize we were all trapped in that world. You included. Victor looked at him, eyes glistening. I'm sorry, Robert. Truly. Robert shook his head. I'm not here for an apology. I'm here to ask, can I help with the fellowship? I may not have money, but I've got time. And I've got lessons to share. Victor reached across the table and gripped his hand. You're hired. Later that night, as snow fell softly outside, Livia found Victor on the balcony, staring at the city lights. He forgave you, she said, joining him. No, Victor said softly. He saw me, and that was enough. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You know, you don't have to prove anything anymore. He smiled faintly. I know, but I want to keep trying. For you. For Sophia. For every kid who thinks they're not enough. Inside, Sophia played Daniel's lullaby on the old upright piano, the notes drifting through the open window like a promise. And in that moment, Victor Langston, once rich in assets, now rich in grace, finally understood redemption wasn't about being begged for forgiveness. It was about becoming someone worth staying for. And as the snow blanketed the earth in silence, he stood tall. Not as a tycoon, but as a father who chose love. Livia stood at the podium, radiant in a simple ivory dress, her hair swept back, eyes bright with quiet triumph. Beside her, Victor adjusted his glasses, no longer in a tailored suit but in a modest navy blazer, his hands steady, his posture relaxed. He wasn't here as a benefactor. He was here as a father, and as one of the center's founding mentors. This place, Livia began, voice clear and warm, was born from brokenness, from silence, from choices that hurt, but it was rebuilt with something far more powerful: presence. The kind of love that doesn't wait for perfection. It shows up anyway. She turned to Victor, and her voice softened. My father once chose